Well, welcome. Here we are, another growing season. It's the end of May, and I wanted to share with you guys an update on my garden this year. Let's head inside. One of the great things about gardening that I found over the last few years is the diversity of the garden from year to year. No matter what you prefer to grow or any challenges that you might have, you can adapt your garden to it every single year. So one thing that I really like about taking videos or photos of my garden and the progression throughout the year is seeing what worked that year, what didn't work, the things that I've learned, placing of certain things that grow well in a certain spot, or even some plants that don't want to be growing in the same location every single year because of depletion of nutrients in the soil and things like that. So having the documentation to be able to look back on, it's really easy to then make plans for the future year. So that is something just to remember with your garden. It doesn't have to be static. You can change where things are every year, and that's the really exciting thing. Sometimes you get volunteer plants, sometimes you found something really cool at the feed store or nursery that you just really wanted to add in that year, and it kind of changes your plans. That happens to me most years. So here we are at the end of May, and I'm going to share with you what I have planted, what I have currently growing, what I've been able to start harvesting, and my plans for the year going forward. So as we enter the garden, this particular one is my main garden, or so I say. This is the one that I first put in a few years ago, and it actually originally was my chicken coop before I built a larger space for them there. So one of the things that I wanted to share was just that you don't need a lot of space to grow a lot of food. This space here is 16 by 16 feet square, and I don't even utilize the center for growing. This is my kind of workspace. And so with that said, like a lot of people that know me personally know that I have 4.5 acres and I have the horses and the other animals. But my garden space is very small, what's actually dedicated to the garden. I have expanded a little bit this year to extend beyond what this fenced in area is. With that being said, one of the things in this garden space is a 6-foot tall deer fence, which really helps keep me more successfully growing. I do still have some problems with rabbits and slugs and smaller things getting in here, but it keeps the deer out. It keeps any rogue chicken or goats out. All right, so let's just get right to it. This bed, if you remember from last year, my goal here was to create a perennial bed. And by that means plants that will grow and reseed year after year. So what I had planted here was artichokes last year. Unfortunately, I must have not overwintered them well because they did not come back. Here is an example of one that was originally there. That little guy there. It might make a comeback, but I need to do some further research to determine how best to help the artichokes overwinter. I've planted here is asparagus. I only planted this last March, so they are just barely popping up. I was very excited to start seeing these guys coming up. This is a purple asparagus. And then I also have some green ones in here as well. Now while we're in this bed, these mushrooms, I just pulled some up the other day, and I've never seen ones like this on the property before, so I'm really curious if any of you fungi educational people know anything about these. The little bit of research that I did do says that any of the fins that are white, generally, are not edible. So I've just been pulling them out and tossing them in a pile because I don't want to risk eating them myself or giving them to any of my animals and hurting them as well. So I just keep pulling these out, but it is odd because I've never seen them before. Usually I get some little brown ones. I don't see any in here at the moment for an example, but anyway, if you know what that is, please feel free to share. But yeah, I'm very excited that the asparagus have finally started popping up. Here's another one right here as an example, just barely starting to come up. And I also have some bush beans in here that have already been eaten on by some critters. And they were mostly a happy accident. I had bought more than what I ended up actually needing. So that is the start of my perennial garden. I have an overload of tomatoes. I'm doing some buckets again like I had success with last year. I was really excited to find some ground cherry variety. I've seen other people use these before online and was really eager to see them locally so I could try them out. And then I have some cherry tomatoes, and then this last one over here is a green zebra, just kind of another happy accident that I found at the store. I placed the buckets along one of my fences on the outside, and it is going to act as a tomato cage for me, so that these tomatoes have something to grow up. I actually personally really hate tomato cages, and I tend to prefer to not use them as much as possible. They get weighed down very easily with the weight of the tomatoes, and I don't feel like they promote very much airflow, which is really important for growing tomatoes. So, one of the other new things that I did this year was I planted my seed potatoes in grow bags. Normally I would plant them in this bed over here, but I actually really liked last year's method with the buckets and being able to just dump the potatoes out, and it just made it a lot easier for harvesting. Here's some of those brown mushrooms I was mentioning that I do find on the property. Now I do tend to prefer to not grab mushrooms by hand because I never know what might be toxic, but in this case I'm just going to grab them and my chances. Anyway, so I have a variety of potatoes planted here. Here's actually one popping up I'm gonna have to cover up. Now that's a great point for showing the grow bags here. You'll notice that these grow bags I folded over. And the idea with that was that when the potatoes grow and get larger and take up space, I have some space I can fold this back up with and add more dirt to. And then obviously as the potatoes grow, they'll take more space and require more soil anyway. So that's a great reminder that I should come through and start adding some more soil to these. In this bed, it's my typical placement for tomatoes. And once again, I'm using this cattle panel archway to allow them to grow up. They end up growing pretty tall, about shoulder height for me. I'm 5'9" for reference. And it works out really well to be able to secure them to the cattle panel with and get really good airflow and everything. So I just have some kind of standard varieties going on in here. A couple of them were some starts that I bought from a friend a while ago. They're struggling a little bit, but we have had a lot of rain. So I keep just trying to pull up their leaves from the ground so that they're not touching the ground directly. That's a big thing with tomatoes. See, this one's really nice because it has a lot of airflow. There are no suckers in the corners, and nothing is touching the ground. So this one is doing really well. This one, see, I've got some touch in the ground. I'm actually just going to snap a couple of these off because touching the ground and more wetness creates more disease and sickness for the tomato plant. Of course, Buttercup. Buttercup is the freaking bane of my existence on my property here. See, here's a perfect example. This tomato plant is looking really healthy, except for these sad ones that are low to the ground and have had water splash on them, etc. So I'm going to take them off. And you just keep doing that with your tomatoes as they grow. There's a lot of tomato tutorial videos out there, so I won't get too deep into that. But here, like I said, again, is where my tomatoes are growing. I planted onions. Ooh, these onions are getting really beautiful. And I believe that these were a 90-day variety, so I have them marked on my calendar that they should be ready by the end of June. You can see I've got a little bit of weeding in here to do. Back on the back of this bed, one of the reasons why I put garlic over here was because I had squash. I had winter squash on the back of this bed that I utilized last year that grew up this fence and used as a trellis. But one of the poor designs that I didn't think about when I originally made this garden was accessibility into these beds. I have to usually step, like I am here, on the side rails to access getting back. So I didn't want to put anything in locations that was going to be too difficult to get to for pruning or for continual harvest. But something like garlic stays there for like 6 months, and then when it's time to harvest, you just pull it all up. So that was why that's back there. I actually planted those, I believe it was October, late October, early November. And you can see that some of these ones up here in the front of the video are getting close. They're getting ready. I need to get in there and put my hands down and feel the shoulders of the garlic and see which ones are ready. Some of the ones in the back I'll just let keep going. They kind of had a little bit of a rougher start. But yeah, got the garlic in there. This year I'm pleasantly surprised that my lettuce is doing really well. I've already had 3 harvests off of it, and it is very prolific and doing very well. I have snap peas back here with a little partial cattle panel just leaning on the fence, and that has been giving it a trellis to grab onto and climb up. So I have snap peas in the back and on the front that's just going to grow into one nice conglomerate there. And of course it's already starting to flower, so we will be getting some snap peas here shortly. I'm very excited about that. I have just another surplus tomato plant in a bucket. I didn't have enough room on my archway, and yes, I'm using a tomato cage for this one, unfortunately. My basil's looking really sad. I need to start harvesting some of it just to help it bush out a little bit more. In this bed along the front, I have planted pole beans that have not come up, but I'm trying to be very patient because in another bed I planted pole beans and they took a really long time to finally come up. So there's still time. This is just an extra cucumber that got planted. So the pole beans and the cucumber can go up on this side of the trellis. Additionally, in this bed now, this was normally the potato bed. I'm trying corn for the first time. Sweet corn and yellow and white varieties. There you go. I had a different plan for corn. I wanted to put it in a whole different area where the chickens have been on the tractor, but that's just not working out this year. So we're gonna try and see how the corn does in rows in this bed back here. I also have some cauliflower and broccoli plants. And excitingly, yesterday I just saw that finally I'm getting a little broccoli head. All right, in this bed, a little bit different this year. The snap peas were over here before and my zucchini plants. But instead this year I was able to get my hands on some Brussels sprouts. So I have some beautiful Brussels sprout going on back here that I have trellised with an 2 cattle panels on an A-frame type. And I'm really eager to see how these are gonna do. I've never grown Brussels sprouts yet, but they are looking really good. I have some more onion sets in the front, and then my Swiss chard, my rainbow chard. This one I just harvested a whole bunch off of last night, and I made artichoke and chard dip. I actually need to cut this guy back. It's really leggy. It's gonna want to go to flower pretty soon, but that's why I took a big harvest off of it last night. And then some of the traditional chard is also getting big and leggy, and I need to make another harvest off of this one, and of course some of the red down here. But this was all planted in the fall, and I didn't really get any sort of crop from it in the fall time, but I've been really happy to have, I think I've also had 3 harvests off of that. In the back of this bed is red cabbage. I haven't seen any heads forming yet, but I just keep an eye on them. They continue to grow. They're looking beautiful. I'm really excited. Luckily for us here in 8B, we have a nice long spring, so there's plenty of times for those brassicas to be able to finally create heads. Lastly, in these buckets up here are some peppers. I believe these ones might be my jalapenos. I also had some bell peppers and some sweet peppers elsewhere. So I just utilized some more of the grow bags and another 5-gallon bucket. Here's another small batch of garlic I just planted last week in this front bed, sharing my crocosmias and the clematis coming up over the arbor nicely. So that will have some time to grow for a fall harvest. In the front here are a couple of eggplants, just starting to look like it's going to want to flower here soon. I'm going to need to pull out these bottom leaves again. It's the same deal with the wet and touching the ground. But this is my first time doing eggplant, so I'm really excited to try that this year. And my cucumbers, my main cucumbers, are in the front here. Again, I'm going to let them vine up and use the outside of the fence as a trellis. And then I will take you over to the new beds. So these new beds, these were projects this last early spring that I built when I took down my lean-to and put up the metal shed row, which I have a whole playlist on with that. This was all salvaged material from taking that down. I actually have a plan to make a third bed, and I didn't because I actually thought I have plenty of growing space. And then as it was when I planted everything out, I thought I really should have made that other bed. So I might do one this summer or wait for another project in the fall or spring to complete that. But these are large beds. These are 4 feet by 8 feet long, 26 inches high, so they're very easy to access. I have just a little Jack-B little pumpkin plant that I'm growing in another bag here. And all throughout here is going to be winter squash. Winter squash, some watermelon plants that are looking a little sad, and the last of my peppers, which like I said, I think that these are bell peppers. So the idea with the squash and having this A-frame trellis is that all the squash and hopefully the watermelon will grow up the trellis really nice and make a really cool little oasis fantasy over here. My blueberry bushes that were planted last year that are finally starting to take a little bit. This bed might look a little bit like a mess because it kind of is a little bit of a mess. I had a main plan to have my zucchini plants over here, but then when none of my beans were sprouting, I bought some more pole beans, and then the day that I went to plant all of these pole beans, the little ones that I had planted were finally coming up. So now I have a ton of pole beans going on in here, and I think there might be a couple bush beans as well. But, oh yeah, these guys are the bush beans. But that's okay because I always feel like we need some more beans. So this will be another fun addition on this side of the trellis. Will allow some more pole beans to grow up. Like I said, I've got zucchini in here, yellow and black beauty, my favorite too. And then I had sown a bunch of carrots, I think about a month ago in here. And obviously I need to come through and thin some of this out. It just breaks my heart to do it. I know I need to, but that just breaks my heart. Anyway, so lastly in here, I was given some onions, and I have a lot of other onions already planted, but I couldn't help myself when I was given some more scapes and planted them. They're starting to pop up some more. So, you know, you might as well intersperse other things all in your garden, right? Why say no to free plants? The last thing I forgot in here were some radishes. The radishes can be seen a little bit better on the other side. Unfortunately, when I sowed my squash, that's why there's so many doubles here, because, you know, I can always pull another one. But then it rained really hard, and I think some of the dirt got washed because I have some squash intermixed in here now with the radishes. See, like this guy's, this radish is starting to look nice. So I'm gonna have to thin them a little bit. And last, I forgot to mention this little guy. It's an Italian parsley that I was given. Got a nice little corner over here. He's starting to look pretty good. So that about wraps it up for the garden tour, how it all looks at the end of May. I have new things planted this year. I have the corn planted, which is new, the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, the brassicas. So I'm really excited about that. I haven't grown this many onions before. What I wanted to just mention really quick was my mulching method. I actually will buy a whole bale of straw, and it will last for all of my beds throughout the season. And the straw I just put on lightly, as you saw in some of the videos, in the areas where there are things that I planted, and I'm covering up So one of the things that I like using the straw for is not only weed suppression, but also for water and moisture maintenance in the dirt. Throughout the summertime, I find that the dirt stays really evenly moist. The top layer that would normally get dry is just the straw. So then you don't have to worry so much about it getting too dry. And then I use the soaker hoses. I'll try and make another video on that at a different time, because I actually need to rework some of what I have going on out here. But I love the soaker hoses because they can go directly underneath the mulch. You just turn them on with a hose, leave them on for a few hours, just do that a couple times during the week, and everything is evenly watered. There's no spray, the foliage, the leaves underneath don't get wet. You're not having to do overhead watering and damaging the leaves in those ways like I've shown with some of the yellowing and everything. So I really like utilizing these two methods in conjunction, and that works really well for me the last couple of years. Thank you guys so much for following me today in my end of May garden tour. Hopefully this is inspiring to you, and I hope that you follow along for the months to come and see how the garden evolves this year. I'm so excited to finally be in our growing season. Thanks again for watching.